What if I told you that although calories are important, you can absolutely lose weight without tracking your calories? The system that we have used for years, and we've been coaching for 16 years. We've had a gym and we've talked to thousands of people over those years. The system that's been working for us has been entirely different, and it hasn't looked at the calories at all. So you're in a position where you're wanting to gain some muscle or strength, and you want to lose a couple of extra kilos. That means you want to get rid of a couple of kilos of fat and maybe kind of recomposition from slightly overweight to a little bit more toned or muscular. Now, most of the advice that is out there is based on bodybuilding principles, where the idea is that you want to have as large muscles as possible. That requires us to bulk first, to eat more calories than the body needs in order to build more muscle faster. That's a hack. And then after that, they're doing a cut. So you're spending half of the time in calorie excess and then half of the time in less calories than your body needs in order to cut away the extra fat. That is a way of going. But functional fitness is kind of derived from the idea of doing sports. And in sports, the idea is more about fueling your performance and not so much about changing your body parameters. And usually, if you are among those 75% of people who are not completely dialed in, then maybe it's enough to get the 80% right in order to get yourself into a better shape already without those cutting and bulking cycles. So the plan we're going after is in 3 stages. We're having calibration first. Calibration means you're spending a couple of weeks on kind of learning how to measure or plan out a meal for yourself, or a day of meals really. And then checking, how is that affecting my body? Am I losing weight or am I gaining weight? If I'm gaining weight, then I need to do a little bit less. And if I'm losing weight, which probably most likely will happen if you're doing any amount of measurement at all, then maybe you're in the right direction. And in order to do that, we'll have to look at the biology first. And then I'll get into the system and the practical details of how to do it in reality. Your starting point matters here. If you have a lot of extra kilos that are, let's call it non-functional body mass, fat, then that might mean that the body is in insulin resistance. It means that we've had so much sugar over such a long time, or carbohydrates that are elevating our blood sugar, that the body has become resistant to the insulin, which means it needs more and more insulin in order for the insulin to actually work. If that is the case, then getting the body down to normal sensitivity for insulin is our first priority. So you want to be extra cautious or extra careful in that case by avoiding sugar. If you can avoid candy and alcohol, then that would be awesome. It will help your body so much faster into this state of being more regulated. And of course, get you better results faster. Whereas if we are in a state where our insulin sensitivity is already good, then maybe we don't need to avoid sugar quite as heavily. It's possible to do cheat days sometimes, but keeping in mind that cheat days can be a way of self-sabotaging goals if we have specific goals for how we want to look or how we want to be performing. Now, the second step after calibration is transformation. Once you've found a level that works for you in terms of change, 0.5 kilo upwards or downwards per week is a good way of going. If you're doing faster, rapid weight loss, then it might be difficult to keep it sustained later on. So 0.5 kilo per week is usually a good aim to reach for. And then the third step is going for maintenance. Once you've reached your ideal body weight, then you want to transform back into a maintenance part where your body is sustaining the same weight over a period of time and also performing well when you're doing sports. And if we're going down in weight, then that means we're increasing the amount of food once we are in maintenance. All right, so protein. Protein is usually the easiest place to start at. Now this chart is from a nutritionist school book. It says that when we're doing a rapid change, rapid growth, for example, as an infant, then we need more protein, of course. So 2 grams per kilogram of body weight for a child is a target. Adolescents need 1.1 gram. But then if we're doing sports, endurance sports will increase it, and strength sports, if we're doing functional fitness, then you're doing endurance and strength, you'll want to be between 1.6 grams and 1.8 grams per kilogram of your ideal body weight. So if we have a lot of extra fat, then discount part of that fat and leave maybe 15% on. So if your target weight is 75 kilos, then 75 times 1.6 leads us to 120 grams of protein per day. Could be more, it could be a little bit less also. It's not actually rocket science in the sense that if you get a couple of grams wrong, nothing will explode. Okay, I'll leave references in the text below. When we're talking about carbs, there's a concept that is not talked about at all anymore, although 10 years ago it was in the fat. That's glycemic index. If we're talking about insulin resistance, the faster the carbohydrate or the sugar, it's the same thing, carbs and sugars, reach the blood, the faster insulin will spike also. And in other words, the slower we go with carbs, the slower the insulin will spike. So the slower our carbs are, the better it will be for the body. And that means good amount of fiber will help us. So vegetables, whole grain stuff, and legumes are better than pasta or bread or candy or pure sugar. Also liquid carbs such as juices, sodas, super fast. Although the fastest one I believe is rice crackers, puffed rice. Instant blood sugar spike. And in terms of fiber, what we want to aim for is 30 grams per day, at least 10 grams per meal. This one is easier if you're eating plant-based and actually going for plants. And that's a bit of a pitfall for vegan diets. If I'm changing to a vegan diet, but I'm doing potato mash and vegan sausages, then that's going to be probably worse for you than doing actual sausages and actual potatoes. So you want to be careful there in terms of the macronutrients, because a lot of them meat substitutes, the fake meat, are going to be mostly fat and well, taste. All right, now for the system that's been actually working as good as anything we've tried over the 16 years. It's called the zone diet. It's about proportioning the macronutrients in our meals together so that they're almost equal. 30% protein, 40% carbs, a little bit more carbs than proteins, and about 30% of our calories on the plate should come from fats. It's a little bit like the plate model, but slightly different. What you're having more of is the protein, because the protein is more important for strength athletes than the other stuff. Whereas if you are an endurance athlete and you're doing an Ironman, then maybe you do need to have 50% of your plate of pure starches or pure sugars. And that's fine, but that's an extreme case, which we're not focusing on right now, because we are probably normal people who are probably not aiming for an Ironman at this point, or training for an Ironman right at this point. So the actual proportions that we're looking for is 7 grams of protein should have 9 grams of carbs and 3 grams of fat. That's called a block, like the smallest common denominator for the food. And why there is 3 grams of fat only instead of the same amount of proteins is because fat is so much more compact. Like if I eat the same amount of fat as I eat protein in terms of grams, then I will have twice as many calories. It's just more compact. So it's also much easier to overeat, and that's maybe one of the surprises that comes when you're starting to look at the calibration, that it's very easy to eat more fat than the body needs, unless we're using it also. Now, the zone is a little bit simplified in the sense that you're not looking at the whole amount of calories for all of the foods. You're usually simplifying it by thinking that this food is a protein, and you're discounting the fats and maybe the carbs that are contained in the protein, because it's mainly protein. So there will be more calories than just the measurements that you're doing. So usually if I'm saying that for a 75 kilo person, we should probably eat 120 grams of protein. If you're looking at that, it would be 1,500 calories-ish, if you're doing the math. 1,500 is probably a little bit too little for maintenance for that person. But there will be extra fat in the meat, if you're eating meat or tofu. So it's slightly simplified. So what you're looking at is, how am I changing in terms of body composition? And if you're doing blood tests, then that will also give you some assistance. And then of course there are levels of accuracy. You could skip measuring your vegetables because they are containing so little calories or carbs compared to starches. So usually if I am measuring my blocks, then I would go for proteins first and then balancing that with starches. So I'm having the rice or the potatoes in the amount of the 7 to 9 proportion. And then I'm eyeballing the fat. And it helps a lot to do a couple of weeks of weighing and measuring. So you're looking at how much does actually 40 grams of protein look like, or how much does actually 50 grams of carbs look like in terms of rice. And getting kitchen scales for that will help. Or you just look at the ingredient list for how much is in a can of tuna, for example, or how much is in a package of tofu. Think of food sources as main calorie source. So meat usually is a protein. So then you're just measuring how much protein do I get from this meat or from this fish. And then the fats will be a bonus. However, it is good to notice then that if I'm having cheese, I'm thinking of it as a protein, but then I realize that there's probably twice as much calories from fat. So then I have to kind of change the paradigm from cheese being a protein to actually being a fat source. And that, I think, is really helpful to understand. Same thing goes for yogurt, for example. Yogurts and milks are usually about the same amount of proteins and carbs. So you can consider those a complete meal because they are balanced already. You don't need to add more carbs or more proteins. Or chickpeas, we're thinking of protein sources for vegans. But if you're looking at the numbers, there's only 6% protein and 60% carbs. So I would consider chickpeas as a carb source. It's basically, no, actually oats contain more protein than chickpeas in that case. Doesn't mean that chickpeas are bad, but in a vegan diet, I need to be a bit more smart about how to find the proteins, because often the protein sources that we are counting as vegan protein sources are containing more fat or more carbs instead. So I'm getting an overload of that. And if I'm not an endurance athlete, I won't burn all of those carbs away, or I won't be using those in order to get sufficient amount of protein. So the things that I'm doing there is I'm adding a high protein source like tofu or protein powder. An easy way of doing a vegan meal is doing a tzatziki of say soy gurt and then adding protein powder to it so that it has my protein needs. And then I'm adding on top of that roasted root vegetables, for example, or vegetables in general, or a salad. So then the sauce will be my protein source and it will be high protein. It works pretty well. Now, there's two ways of actually counting. Finelli is a good source. It has a database of basically all foods that are publicly available, at least. It's really good for counting and measuring stuff. Or you could use the lists that CrossFit has provided in their training guide for level 1, which are free and available for download just here. On the lists, we're counting in blocks. If my ideal weight is 75 kilos, then 15 or 16 blocks would be kind of my baseline to start from-ish. And then I'm counting how many meals am I taking. Am I doing 3 meals a day? Then that would be 40 grams of protein per meal. Or 5.7 blocks, so 6 blocks, 5 blocks. And in that case, I'm just using the list saying how much protein should I have, how much potatoes or rice should I have, and maybe add the vegetables for free. And then look at the fats. Or you compose them by doing a little bit more math on your own by looking at the ingredient list or finale. And you're doing that for 2 weeks in order to get it calibrated. And then you're keeping that calibration up until you're reaching whatever target you're aiming for. Now, how do I actually make this work? There's a concept called mise en place. That would be the idea that you're taking off time once a week, probably, for making a food list. So you're getting a recipe, you know already I need 40 grams of protein per meal, for example, if I'm doing 3 meals at 75 kilos ideal weight. And then you're adding the carbs from the recipe and you're counting how much carbs do I need for that. Then you draw a line on the side and you're writing in what do I need to buy in terms of groceries in order to be able to cook this. And I would usually cook 4 or 6 meals in one single go so that I don't have to cook every single time I'm eating. That would make it easier. So I would multiply 40 grams times 6. So that would be around 1.2 kilos of tofu or fish or whatever I'm eating. 1.2 kilos for those 6 meals. And then if I have a partner and they eat the same amount, then 2.4 kilos. Once you've done this and you realize that, okay, this was a really good week, then you can save that grocery list and just redo it again. It's easier to just repeat a working system than to reinvent it every single week. Unless your brain needs the novelty of new foods. It's nice to try out new recipes, of course. One way is alternating dinners, but keeping the breakfast the same, for example. Now, how about restaurants? If we are in the calibration phase, I would try to avoid going into the restaurants because I'm not entirely calibrated yet. If I have to, then I would focus on getting the protein source first and then potentially limiting the amount of carbs that are on it, because restaurant food tends to be higher in fats than home food. So the calories will be there already without me kind of working for it. So you could go for fibers in terms of salad and the protein, or you're lessening the amount of carbs until you know exactly how much carbs you need for a meal. And that said, the more in balance your body is with insulin, the easier it will be to get a day off by cheating on sugars and carbs or even alcohol without it actually hurting the body too much. But the more we do it, the more out of whack the body will become also. So there needs to be a balance where we're doing 90% of the time on a good balance, and then maybe sometimes we're off the chart for social reasons. And maybe there we're coming to kind of this dilemma of self-sabotaging. After a while, we're realizing that, okay, I'm eating like shit this day or this week, and it might be partly the brain's way of retracing back to the evidence that it has had of who am I in terms of identity architecture. We may have decades of evidence saying that I am not good at diet and I will eat everything that comes in front of me if it's a sweet thing. And changing that is going to be hurtful. It's a little bit like if I'm trying to quit smoking, for example, and somebody is offering me a cigarette, and I'm saying I'm not a smoker. It feels like a lie, because it is a lie, because I have been smoking just recently, and it actually even hurts the brain to say out the wrong thing because it doesn't believe it. So what you have to do is first do bursts of very focused change in order to amass evidence against the old identity to bring out a new one. So you're forcing yourself into a new path. And it might help also if you have a diary routine to bring in some input from the diary. So I'm doing currently, every single day I'm writing a diary. I'm reading out a couple of things that are in my new identity architecture. You could call it affirmations if you want to. I am the person who eats vegetables and whatever it is, fiber for dinner. And if you repeat that to yourself over 100 days, every single day, then that will definitely help in making the brain believe in the new identity as opposed to fighting against it. So you're not self-sabotaging yourself anymore as much. And another thing that is of course important is talking with your partner. If you have a partner and they're not on board, then it will be a whole lot more difficult to work on change. So work together and agree on together what your goals are. That will be crucial for making things happen. All right, so to recap, what you want to start with is looking at your protein needs. 1.6 grams per ideal body weight in kilos. So if you want to be 75 kilos, then 1.6 grams would be 120 grams of protein per day. And then you might want to plan out, do I need 4 meals a day or maybe 3 meals? And then just divide those 120 grams on each meal. And perhaps that is sufficient to start with. Maybe it's already enough to look at the protein source. The next step, if you're feeling like you can handle it, is doing the carb balancing also. So 7 to 9 proportions. And maybe what matters also is the principle of vacuum. In order to actually make things happen, you need to have the headspace and the physical time for making the planning. If you're all constantly overwhelmed with too many things to do and your brain is always stressed about all the things that it has to do, then it'll be very difficult to sustain a change. So you need to have enough time for yourself to block off for planning the mise en place and the groceries and maybe the cooking also. And remember that you want to have enough time to relax as well. And that might mean either that we're doing less mindless scrolling, doom scrolling, or perhaps we're doing less commitments for a while so that we have enough time for a transformation of the body instead. Because if we're doing too many hobbies and it's actually hurting our health, then that's a counterproductive thing in the long run. Okay, that's it.